We are joined by Scott McConnell, the Executive Director of Lifeway Research. Scott, thanks for coming on the program.
Good to be with you.
And so this week, you guys over at Lifeway Research released a new cooperative program study related to some information, some research statistics related to the cooperative program that you had done in the fall. So walk us through what brought this research about, and then we'll get into the research after that.
As the Cooperation Group Task Force began their work, Jared Wellman and Bart Barber reached out to me and asked if Lifeway Research could help by polling Southern Baptist pastors, asking just kind of getting a temperature of where pastors are at and congregations are at in terms of how they feel about the cooperative program itself. And that cooperation group actually, touched on a lot of other issues and actually focused their report on other issues. But they still thought this would be helpful, and it gave good context to their conversations. And then they recommended that this be released after SBC to assist in the promotion of the cooperative program, but also, honest dialogue about the cooperative program today.
Yeah. So let's jump into the data. I guess off the top, depending on how you look at it, 2/3 of the people surveyed, and we can talk about the methodology here when we get into this, have a positive view of the cooperative program.
They do. We gave them a 5-point scale and just kind of said, put yourself, where are you? Where's your church at in terms of the cooperative program? 2/3 solidly positive, 22% right in the middle, kind of a mixed view, and then just 7% with a negative view, and 4% indicated they're unaware of the cooperative program, which is a constant reminder that there's a new generation always coming into the Southern Baptist Convention that needs to understand how the cooperative program works and what the benefits of it are. But just the positives versus negatives, almost 10-1, positive versus negative. But the fact that not everybody's positive, does give us a little pause to say, okay, what's going on here? And so some of the other questions on the survey help unpack some of the details around that.
Yeah. So let's talk about who took the survey too, because you guys pushed this out. You pushed out to a lot of Southern Baptist churches. Basically, I think I read in the methodology, if in the annual church profile or, in Workspace, SBC Workspace, if you had an email address for the church, you sent them an email. That was basically it. I mean, we've got 40-something thousand churches and congregations across the country. A lot of people got the email. And also we ran some stuff at Baptist Press that if you didn't get the email or you wanted to be a part of it, here's how you can do that. And had a little over 4,000 people. Is that right on the responses?
Yeah, almost 4,200. And so again, the priority was if we had a pastor email, it would go to the pastor. But if not, one per church was received, and they had an opportunity to respond.
Yeah, so some of the other fascinating data in there, and this is something that I think we see on the data that we pull at the executive committee and we put in the annual and the book of reports every year, that 2/3 of churches are giving 5% or more through the cooperative program.
Yeah, so their self-reported numbers, in the survey, indicate that, and so those are strong levels, and another 28% are giving something, but less than 5%.
Yeah.
And just 6% on the survey indicated that they were not giving at all to the cooperative program as a congregation.
Yes. So, and you talk about throughout the research here, you had several questions you're asking about sentiment. This was about sentiment, awareness, and support of the cooperative program. And I think it would be no surprise that the churches that are giving nothing to the cooperative program, the sentiment was a lot lower from those churches. I mean, you note it throughout the research.
Yes, they were the most likely to disagree with different descriptors of the cooperative program throughout. And normally we don't try to give away the topic of a survey when an invite goes out, but because we weren't giving out an incentive or anything on this survey, this was a goodwill thing. We did make a point to say we wanted to capture diverse opinions about the cooperative program. So, if a church had run into some point of contention and had stopped giving, we still wanted to hear from them. And so we did get a good number. That may not measure up to exactly how many churches are not giving at all in total.
Yeah,
I don't have that statistic.
Yeah, and just basically anecdotally from what we know from ACP data and other things, it is a little bit higher than 6%. We know that. But it is good to hear those thoughts of the ones that aren't giving and have those reasonings. So, and get that sentiment as we look at the whole, because it's not just about those 2/3 that are supportive. It's also about that third that may have questions or may want things to change in the SBC, that they would support more. And speaking of supporting more, one of the findings, and I think this was encouraging, was that a 75%, 3 and 4 said that they have kept their same cooperative program percentage or raised it in the last 5 years.
We live in a very polar culture, and the people who get the headlines, the voices that are heard, tend to be those who have strong opinions on either side of any issue. And to actually hear that there are so many folks, the majority of Southern Baptist congregations are holding steady in terms of their support for the cooperative program, literally through dollars on a regular basis, a percentage of their budget. And so, that's very encouraging that the voices we're hearing, both positive and negative, are really the exceptions. And it is interesting that, on the particular question of has your giving gone up or down, those that increased and those that decreased are exactly the same percentage, 19% each. Yeah. And so, so it's just important to realize that sometimes, if somebody can articulate their opinion well, it doesn't mean that there's necessarily a large number of people that share their opinion or share a negativity that may be coming out.
Yeah, that's true. And, and along those lines, the sentiment and the people that we see that maybe you don't hear a lot about, but are still faithfully supporting the cooperative program. A lot of them, we talk about, I know on my side and you at Lifeway, even though Lifeway doesn't receive cooperative program funds, we think about the cooperative program a lot from the national level. Because both of us work at national entities. I worked with you at Lifeway Research and at Lifeway at one point. And we think of things a lot of times on the national level. But I think one of the things that came out of this research as well showed a really strong understanding and support for state-funded or state cooperative program funded ministries like children's homes or universities or just training and stuff that the state conventions do as well.
Absolutely. 77% of congregations were very positive about that in terms of it being an objective that they cared about. Because we ask them both whether they think it currently describes, but also whether it was important to them. And so this was listed as a benefit, and more than 3/4 of congregations want that. That's a benefit that they believe in with the cooperative program, and that's kind of as those dollars start moving, that's where they start. It's starting at a local, regional level there in your state, supporting missions and ministries and activities there that churches care a lot about.
Yeah, and a lot of that, I mean, we talk about why. I want to stay away from asking you the why questions. I think those are things that we have to ask ourselves a lot. And you being just a researcher, you're just like, hey, you're just in charge of the numbers, not the reasoning behind it. But one thing that I think we can say is that we're seeing a lot more, you mentioned the sentiment, 77% on the state level, 66% on the national level. It really boils down to like relationships though. And it should be no surprise that the relationships are stronger on the state level because they're more local than on the national level. And I think moving forward, we could all agree that the key for cooperative program success in the future is we look on the 100th anniversary of the cooperative program next year when we meet together in Dallas. We'll be doing a big CP 100 celebration on that. It's really going to come down, the future of the cooperative program is going to really come down to those relationships we're building now that will be there for the future.
Absolutely. As we mentioned, different numbers, some very strong support, others we see some support is eroded. Where we see that erosion, that's an indicator of some trust that's been lost. Mm-hmm. And when we look at other surveys across the nation right now, we see trust in institutions eroding.
Yeah, not just specifically but what most in Southern Baptist world. I mean, that's like across the board.
Yeah, so people's trust in banks, in the police department, in other places of business, and so what most people don't think of when they hear the word institution is that for those in sociology, an institution is actually a place where you're building relationships. So it's a bowling league. Yeah. It's your country club that you'll play golf at. It's something you're voluntarily going into relationships with other people to do an activity together. It's your kids' travel baseball team. That's an institution, and people don't necessarily think that way. But that's what the Southern Baptist Convention began as, is a group of people wanting to be on mission together. And in the cooperative program was another expression of that, saying, can we do this more efficiently together? Well, so the relationships are really the glue that holds it together. And the more relationships you have, the more likely you're going to know somebody who's serving on a committee in your state convention. The more likely you're going to know somebody who's a trustee. And when it's somebody who's holding those seats with some responsibility, it's a whole lot easier to trust that group than if it's all them and they. And so if there's any encouragement, it's really not the numbers we're looking at, it's the relationships that exist within the Southern Baptist Convention that really make this happen.
Well, and I think that's one of the reasons that we've seen so much, maybe the uptick in participation in the annual meeting, is because it's become a place to build and foster those relationships, where maybe it wasn't as likely to do that in the past. I don't know. My Southern Baptist annual meeting history just goes back to about 2011, so I'm working on 15 years of that. But at the same time, there are a lot more affinity groups today that are meeting at the annual meeting. There are a lot more times for meals and things like that are being hosted by entities or by affinity groups or just collectives of like-minded Southern Baptists. And the more we have of that, the more people want to be a part of it because they're building those relationships. And so we're seeing that relationship growth, I think, at the annual meeting. Now it's just, will it translate over to the cooperative program? And I think it will in the long run, as we foster and build those relationships. But one thing that you mentioned a minute ago is that we can do more together than we can do in the part. And looking back on that 100 years, that's kind of the reason for the cooperative program to start. And it was interesting to see in the research that the different feelings about how, does the cooperative program prevent direct funding appeals? It wasn't as strong as I thought it would be, because that was mainly the reason that it started, because in the 1920s, people would travel around from the entities and different groups to just appeal to churches, love offering for this, love offering for that. And they kind of got tired of it, I think, at one point, and just said, look, we'll give one time and you guys figure it out how to split it up. And that's basically what the cooperative program is doing. So whenever I look at the data that you guys presented and that being lost on people today, I thought that was just interesting.
Yeah, if I'm just looking just at pastor numbers here within the congregations that reported, and we saw that drop back in 07, 08. It was 6 out of 10 pastors agreed that the CP protects churches from direct funding appeals, and now it's just under half. Yeah. And so they're feeling that. They're feeling the extra emails, the extra appeals requests, and of course those mechanisms were always in place when the cooperative program was started. The autonomy of the local church was not taken away. They could give a direct gift to any of the entities at any time. And so that's always been there. But the efficiency of the process is if you give through the cooperative program, the dollars are going to all those entities that you care about and covering all the bases.
Yeah, they really are. And you mentioned the looking back into 2007, 2008 numbers. So it's not quite apples and oranges, but a little bit different because some of the questions weren't asked. They were asked to pastors, and this was of congregations. There's a little bit of matching in there, but across the board, though, we saw a drop in awareness, support, sentiment among pastors and leaders in the SBC from 17 years ago.
Yeah. So as they're describing the cooperative program, and the statements, honestly came from some of those founding ideas, as well as the way the cooperative program has been promoted through the years. The handful of statements we gave them, asking them, does this describe the cooperative program? And we see, 10, 12% fewer pastors agreeing than what we saw back in 07, 08, with core things like, is the cooperative program supporting SBC entities and ministries and missions that our church values? Still 8 out of 10 but
Yeah, still
it used to be
strong.
9 out of 10.
Yeah, but it used
to be 9 out of 10. Similarly, the state convention entities is in there as well. Still 3/4 agreeing that it's supporting state convention work that their church values. We also see that almost 3/4 agree that it's supporting mission endeavors efficiently. So, another area where trust can be eroded is, yes, it's going to a good cause, but are the dollars being used efficiently? And again, the vast majority are saying yes, but it has slipped by 12% in the last 15 years.
It's interesting to me because being somebody kind of behind the scenes and seeing that, it's probably more efficient now than it's ever been. But I don't know why that's not coming across. I mean, that's one of those things. The why questions are now the ones that kind of have to be asked, in the conversations, in the rooms from here on. In those meetings of those of us who work in cooperative programs for supported entities and across states and everything like that. Now it's like taking this data. That's what this data is useful for, because we have to ask ourselves why. I mean, this is not a blame game to blame churches or whatever for not feeling that way. It's all right. Now, what do we do? How are we going to respond to that? I mean, the onus is on us, from the cooperative program receiving entities to reverse these trends, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I think that the call to entity leaders is to be investing in trust. And, one of the difficulties, to be really honest, is that the reasons somebody may not trust could be different. So to earn your trust, Jonathan, may take something different than to earn my trust. And God forbid, they may be opposites.
Yeah.
So leaders are in a very unenviable position in that regard, that there's not just one thing to solve. No. Earning trust is going to be different across the board. But as you mentioned, some of this is just communication. Can we communicate better? How efficiently things are happening? Some of the systems that have been put in place are pretty amazing in terms of, church planter assessment and church planter training and some of those kind of things that just weren't in place 15 years ago, are actually much more efficient. And so, so to communicate some of those things, I think would be helpful to local congregations. And to be honest, some of the pastors and other church leaders are answering for their congregation, and they're probably admitting that they're doing less education on their end.
Yeah,
and so some of that miss is, maybe we're not doing the education classes for our kids anymore. We're not pausing to take part of a sermon or a Sunday night to explain the CP and how we're working together in these missions endeavors around the world. And so, the church owns part of that as well. Yeah. And so, those are the practical things. But I still would circle back to the thing that we all can do is invest in relationships with each other, because we're going to enjoy this Great Commission task a lot more when we're doing it together.
Yeah. And Scott wants to bring back training union. That's what I got out of that statement. Training union, RAs and GAs. So, Scott McConnell pushing for those. But that is church practice has changed. And as a result, we've seen maybe some educational opportunities or just things that were taught, things that were passed on generation to generation that aren't anymore, because the change in church participation, number one, and church models and how churches are doing church throughout the week. We used to have 3 solid meetings of churches every week. Many churches now, it's like 1.5 maybe, because you may have a home group or maybe a home group, maybe a Wednesday night thing, and then Sunday mornings. Sunday nights kind of, it's still there in some churches, but a lot of churches gone by the wayside. I don't know. You're at Hermitage Hills, I think, over in this part of town. You guys don't have Sunday nights, do you?
We do not. We've got Wednesday nights.
Yeah. Wednesday nights. Same here. Wednesday nights and Sunday mornings. I mean, that's what we have, and it's almost every church that I've been in Nashville, I believe, is like that. Especially some of the larger churches, they just don't do Sunday nights. So I'm trying to think of the last church we were in that was a Sunday night church, and I think it would have been 2003 through 6, whenever we were in Lake Charles. Like that was the last time I was in a church that had Sunday nights. So change in church practice has consequences. Sounds a little bit far, but you get different results whenever you change the practice. And, I think maybe the cooperative program has suffered as a result of that a little bit, just because we lost those educational opportunities. So the impetus is now on the pastors using moments in the Sunday morning service to educate people about the cooperative program. We offer something actually, which is really neat at the executive committee. I'm not sure how many folks watching this know about this, but if you go to the SBC.net website, scroll to the bottom, you can click on CP Stories. We have a story we produce in conjunction with the North American Mission Board and the IMB of a missionary highlight every week. So we have an opportunity for you, maybe during your sermon, maybe not the sermon, but the offertory, or at some point during the week, to pray for a Southern Baptist missionary every week. It may be overseas, it may be somebody here local stateside, the church planner, or something like that. But we have that. We produce that every week for churches to use. So there are resources out there. And I know the IMB, you mentioned, the different ways to build relationships. IMB is another one that they've done a great job of having their missionaries kind of adopt churches, so to speak, and make contact with those churches when they're stateside. And every church in the SBC has been assigned to a missionary, so that the missionaries get to know the churches and churches get to know the missionaries, because we're more likely to support people financially that we know than ones we don't. And that has a greater impact than just a cooperative program. Obviously, that helps Lottie Christmas offering, and NAM doing the same thing for Annie Armstrong Easter offering. But we're seeing the attempts to be made there, but it takes time. And maybe in 17 years, whenever you do this survey again in 2041, Scott, that sentiment will be back up, and we'll see I just hit my camera, sorry. We'll see the sentiment go back up to, back to what we saw in 2007 and 8.
I think the survey confirms that the objectives of the cooperative program still resonate with Southern Baptists. Yeah. And yes, there's some questions that some are raising on some of the efficiency, some of the exact allocations, some of those kinds of questions. But really across the board, the things that it supports, the missionaries, the church planting, the theological education, the state convention ministries, those are all things that resonate with Southern Baptist congregations, and they're seeing the lostness around them. So they're wanting people to be reached in their own state and around the world. And that's who we are. And that's what this effort is about. And so if, the more we can keep that the conversation and be investing in that, I think there are good days ahead for the cooperative program.
Absolutely. Well, that's a good place to end it here. Scott, thanks for being with us. I know that, we released this at Baptist Press, but if they want to see the full report, all the slides, there's 80 pages or so of slides with different information broken down ethnically, geographically, a lot of different things, size of church as well. They can find that over at lifewayresearch.com. And what else are you guys working on over there?
We're working on some new research on groups that we'll be sharing this fall and into the new year. And so that's definitely kind of a front and center for us right now, as well as some research on biblical worldview.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, thanks, Scott, for joining us today. Thank you for everything you're doing over at Lifeway Research. And thank you for joining us online today and each and every time we have here on SBC Life.